All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Bassam Haddad. I am the director of the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason University, and I am thrilled to have with me my colleague, friend, and formidable professor of Islam and politics and much more, because he does much more, and I've known him for many, 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 many years. Professor Peter Mandaville of George Mason University and the Middle East and Islamic Studies program, as well as the Center for Global Islamic Studies at George Mason University. Peter, good morning, and how are you?
Good morning, Wissam. Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for inviting me for the conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
I am very excited you are here. You and I have known each other for a long time, and I've been following your work even before I came to George Mason University in 2007. I believe you were there since 2000. Wow.
Yeah, 21
That's
years. I
that's
can't even
really
believe it.
remarkable. That's really
Yes.
remarkable. So I am very excited to have you be our fourth guest on our Middle Eastern Islamic Studies podcast. We had Professor Abdulaziz Sashidina inaugurate our podcast, and then we hosted Maria Daycake, Professor Maria Daycake, and then Professor Hussein Yilmaz. He was excited that I pronounced it incorrectly because that's how the Turks pronounce it. Correctly is Hussein, but he was excited about it. And then we're hosting you, and right after we're going to speak with Professor Sumaya Hamdani. So we would have covered all of the core faculty at the Middle East and Islamic Studies Institute to address the research. So without further ado, I will be asking you to address your research and the publications first. But before we do this, I have to share with our viewers or listeners your bio. It's again, with all of these bios, I can only share so much. Dr. Peter Mandeville is professor of international affairs in the Shar School of Policy and Government, which is also where I teach, and director of the Ali Vural Ak Center for Global Islamic Studies at the Chess School. And he is also a member of the core faculty of the Middle Eastern Islamic Studies program. And of course, all of these units are at George Mason University. He is also a senior research fellow at Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, where I actually got my degrees, my graduate degrees. We keep following each other. He's also a senior visiting expert at the United States Institute of Peace and a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. From 2011 to 2012, he was a member of former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's policy planning staff, where he was involved in shaping the U.S. response to the Arab Spring. From 2015 to 2016, he served as a senior advisor in the Secretary of State's Office of Religion and Global Affairs, where he acted as the U.S. Department of State's primary subject matter expert on Islam. Previous affiliation have included the Center for Strategic and International Studies and the Pew Research Center. He is author. Oh yeah, this is not over. He is author. He's the author of the books Islam and Politics, third edition, which came out in 2020, which had a different name earlier. Perhaps Peter can share this with us. And Transnational Muslim Politics, Reimagining the Ummah in 2001. In addition to several co edited books, many journal articles, of course, and chapters and op ed commentary pieces in outlets such as Foreign Affairs, the International Herald Tribune, The Guardian, The Atlantic Online, and Foreign Policy. He has testified multiple times before U.S. Congress on topics including political Islam, U.S. counterterrorism policy, and human rights in the Middle East, and thankfully he has done that. His research has been supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. I sound like NPR because you hear that all the time on NPR. That's good. The Carnegie Corporation
A
of New
just,
York.
peaceful, and verdant world. I
Yeah.
think, right?
And don't worry, Peter, I'm almost done. The Carnegie Corporation of New York, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Social Science Research Council, the British Council, and Henry Luce Foundation. I'm going to stop here and ask that you share with us some of the details about your research and writing and publications.
Sure. Thanks, Bassam, and thanks in particular for highlighting my role in helping to shape the U.S. response to the Arab uprisings, because clearly that went well. Um, so, in terms of my research, I'm actually in the middle of uh, I'm finishing off one big project, right in the middle of another modest size one, and then just getting started on what I hope will be my next book. Um, do you want me to like say a little bit about each of them? What's the right
Yes,
way
I
to
would really
proceed?
appreciate it. Starting with the most recent because it's really exciting, the updates, and I know that you've written forwards and so on.
So you mean the most recent, like what I'm just starting on, or what I'm finishing
Oh, sorry,
off? The ending.
the most recent edition of Islam and Politics.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so the Islam and Politics book is one that I've been working on across several editions now. The third edition just came out last year. I first developed it after teaching courses on political Islam for several years and never being satisfied with any of the textbook options that were out there. So I thought, forget it. I'm just going to write my own textbook to use for this class. So it first came out. It was first written in 2006. It's been through a couple of editions since. I use it as a teaching text for my Islam and Politics class, and I've been happy to see it, gradually being adopted by many other colleagues around the U.S. and around the world as kind of a core teaching text for broad survey and overview courses dealing with Islamism and contemporary political Islam. It was written mainly as a teaching text, but it kind of has a little bit of a researchy analytic framework built into it, in that it's kind of focused on trying to explain the ways in which different sorts of political environments, including regime types, the presence or absence of certain kinds of conflicts, socioeconomic factors, the ways in which manifestations of even ostensibly the same ideological and activist tradition, namely the sort of Muslim Brotherhood, Ikhwani type politics, even when that same movement and political parties based on it is present in different countries, what that movement looks like, their political priorities, their agendas, their methods will vary enormously from context to context because of these different factors. And that kind of basic point is the heart of the book. And it tries to give us a global cross-regional survey of contemporary political Islam at the same time. Already starting to think about the fourth edition, which I think is going to be a really significant rewriting, maybe a total gutting and renovation of the book, just because, so much has gone on around these issues since 2006 when it was first written. Just the heart of the debate about political Islam, the questions people are asking are very different. And so it's probably needs a kind of a more thorough reboot for the next edition.
Thank you, Peter, for this quick summary. Can you, at this point, share with us some of the plans you have for the upcoming research and upcoming volumes? I know that you're um, always working on something, and that the word "something" here refers to a set of some things.
So, in terms of the active projects that I have going right now, the one that's been occupying most of my time over the last few years is a project that's actually based at Georgetown's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and it's been supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, who I know has also been very supportive of your work as well in the Arab Studies Institute. This project is called the Geopolitics of Religious Soft Power. And at its broadest level, it's kind of trying to explore various ways that uh, governments around the world integrate aspects of religion and religious outreach into their foreign policy conduct. The heart of the project, though, is really in the region that you and I study, because the heart of the project is a comparative analysis of the ways that Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey in recent years have operationalized various forms of religious outreach and religious power projection. So this project, is not an individual research project. It's not primarily about me doing research. Rather, what we're trying to do with it is to kind of create a field of study around the intersection of religion or religion, or what we're calling religious soft power, and foreign policy analysis. So we have dozens of contributors from all around the world whose work looks at a wide range of countries, and who, religiously speaking, deal with an incredibly broad range of different religious traditions. So yes, there is a lot of focus on Islam, but we have scholars whose work look at Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, very, very broad-based. And if you look at the project's landing page, you can see kind of the full set of articles, working papers. We've done short documentary films. We also have 2 edited volumes coming out of the project, both of them with Oxford University Press. One of them I'm particularly proud of because it's something that I have been wanting to do for, I think I can literally and accurately say, decades at this point. I'm sure that a lot of the folks tuning in today and listening will be very familiar with this long-running discussion we've been having about Saudi Arabia's export of Wahhabism around the world and the impact that it has on Islam in many Muslim majority and minority contexts around the world. And as much as this issue has been discussed and debated, there's never actually been a proper academically robust analysis of this phenomenon. And so one of the main outputs coming from this project is an edited volume called Wahhabism and the World, Understanding Saudi Arabia's Impact, Understanding Saudi Arabia's Global Impact on Islam. And we, for this volume, commissioned 15 chapters from specialists all around the world whose work has examined different facets of Saudi religious transnationalism over mainly the last 80 years. And these are people who have all studied the effect and the impact that Saudi Arabia's propagation of a particular set of understandings and interpretations of Islam and Islamic practice have had on contexts from Indonesia to Kyrgyzstan to Bangladesh to Ethiopia to Bosnia, wide range of case studies. And when put together, we finally get a fascinating and comprehensive portrait of what Saudi Arabia's export of Wahhabism actually looks like and what the impact of it has been. So that book is in production right now, and Oxford University Press promises me that it will be out by the end of the year. We're also doing another edited volume out of the project that's just called The Geopolitics of Religious Soft Power, that is full of a set of about 12 country case studies that look at and kind of try to identify comparisons, points of convergence and divergence in the strategies that governments around the world use in integrating religion into their external relations and foreign policy conduct. It's got the Turkey, it's got the Iran, it's got Saudi Arabia, but it's also got China is in there, India is in there, Brazil is in there, Israel is in there, the United States is in there, Russia is in there. So it's a nice global story that we're trying to tell with that. So that's that project, Geopolitics of Religious Soft Power. That's going to wind down in the next few months. I'm right in the middle of a project, fairly modest in scale. This one supported by the Henry Luce Foundation, who kindly provided some support to myself, Tarek Masood at Harvard University, and Kadir Yildirim at the Baker Institute at Rice University to conduct, late last year, a multinational survey, a cross-country survey, cross-national survey that includes Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Pakistan, and in Indonesia. About sample size of about 9,000 people, evenly spread across those 5 countries. And what we're looking at, what we're asking them about, is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their religious life. So the basic question is, how has this pandemic affected the way Muslims understand their religion, how they practice it. We're asking questions about religious authority, about some of the tensions between governments and religious authorities that have emerged in the context of the pandemic. We already published an initial piece out of that project. It came out in the Washington Post's Monkey Cage blog a couple weeks ago, where we were kind of entertaining the question of whether the pandemic seems to be leading to an increase generally in religiosity in the Muslim world, or whether people seem to be pulling away from religion because of the pandemic, as some analysts had predicted. Our finding was that, or we see evidence in our data of actually increased religiosity within our sample pool. So that project is in motion. It'll continue to publish commentary pieces here and there, and a larger report later this year. And then I'm also just getting started on what I hope will be my next main individual research project, and eventually my next book. But I've been talking too long, so I'm going to stop now.
Thank you, Peter. Do you feel inadequate that you don't have much on your plate in terms of research and publications, um, compared to, others, or generally in absolute term? Well, I mean, how this is remarkable, Peter. I mean, I'm really, usually people yell at me and tell me that, I need to stop working, and seeing you is inspiring. This is great.
Although, just to be clear, that whole geopolitics of religious soft power project, like out of the, I don't know, 80 some publications that have come out of it, maybe 2 of them have my name on it. So it's not, it's more the kind of project where I'm, trying to create a platform for showcasing other people's work rather than doing a lot of my own work. So it's not like I'm, doing most of the work.
I mean, I see you. I mean, I've been watching you, again, over the past 14 years, doing all this amazing work. And I've always been amazed and impressed, and learned a lot from what you do. And of course, I use your work in my classroom, which gets us to the second topic, which is teaching, where you
Mm.
also, where you also excel, and people love taking your classes. So I want to give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about your teaching, the courses you teach, things that you have adapted, kind of like, the way you change the title of the book to adapt to changing circumstances, or changing languages and nomenclature, and something about the classroom experience with our students, specifically at George Mason University, but also broadly in the United States, in this context, in today's
Sure,
context.
sure. So, in terms of Middle East and Islamic studies related classes, the one that I've taught most consistently throughout my academic career, since the late 90s, has been a class that's essentially an overview of contemporary political Islam. And when I first started teaching it, I called the class Political Islam. And about 10, 15 years ago, I started to get rather dissatisfied with that nomenclature. And the whole concept of political Islam, became increasingly conceptually fraught to me. And I thought that it would be better to just kind of simplify matters by kind of explaining in the course's title that really what the class is trying to do is to understand the intersection of Islam and politics. And so I, went through the process of changing the title of the class from Political Islam to Islam and Politics. I think some of our colleagues were kind of like, what the hell are you doing? Why are you going through this whole committee process to kind of, just change a few letters around, basically, when you look at the big picture? And so I went off on this big spiel, I remember, at the committee meeting, kind of explaining conceptually why political Islam is problematic and why it's better to call the course Islam and Politics. And they're like, oh, okay, sure, if this is important to you, we can do that. But I even went so far as to change the title of the book, because this book that
Can you
sorry, go
explain this
ahead.
to us at some point? How you explained the change? Can you explain it to us when you're done?
Sure. So the book that you kindly showed the cover of, the one that's in a third edition, Islam and Politics, when it was first published, the first edition is actually called Global Political Islam. And my experience of these conceptual concerns kind of coincided with the preparation of the second edition. I was actually very grateful. Like I figured that I would be able to get the name change through our curriculum committee in the Public and International Affairs Department at Mason. I was much more worried about going to my publisher and saying, hey, so do you mind if we change the title of this book for the second edition? Because, it has marketing and branding implications. And I was so grateful that, like, without hesitation, when I explained it to them, they were like, yeah, sure, we can do that, no problem. So from the second edition, the book became Islam and Politics rather than Global Political Islam. In terms of kind of the concerns that I was having with this whole formula of political Islam, right? So that framing, that formula, I think is problematic in terms of what it assumes about the nature of Islam, what it assumes about what it means to be political. To kind of say political Islam would suggest that there's Islam, or there are times when Islam is not political, and this course and this book is only going to focus on when Islam is political. But precisely because the course tries to unpack our assumptions about what constitutes politics and what constitutes the political, I thought it was better to not make certain presumptions about the appropriate or inappropriate bundling of religion and the political in the way that the title of the book is formulated. So I decided to sort of treat these two ostensibly, explicitly, on the face of it, literally on the cover, as two separate concepts, but to kind of throughout the book, and indeed in the introductory, somewhat more theoretical chapter, kind of explore in depth some of the conceptual and theoretical complications that arise from the conjoining of religion and politics, particularly operating in a environment or environments in which secularism, or the debundling or untethering of religion and politics, has a certain normative valence to it. And so, my treatment of that topic owes a lot to the work of people like Talal Asad, who have, I think, offered very powerful theorizations and explorations of how, the very categories of the secular and the religious have come into being, and how they operate in the social and political realm.
Thank you, Peter. Again, I wanted to ask you about the current circumstances in the United States and beyond, of course, in the Middle East and the Muslim world. How have these circumstances changed or began to change your approach in the classroom, or have they? Considering that a lot of the issues about race are also issues that have to do with Islam in many ways, because of the diversity of Muslims in terms of race, and the kind of sometimes less developed, not always, study of these matters when it comes to certain countries in the Muslim world. And is there something that you will be adding to your curriculum, or are you thinking about even new classes that would address issues of social justice related to race, probably because I know that you have addressed a lot of the material on political economy and so on in your classes on Islam. But is this going to move you in a particular direction, or should it? And that would be great to hear from you what you have to say.
Yeah, no, it absolutely has. And this actually takes me back to the new book project that I'm starting now, which I hope will eventually be reflected in my teaching, not just in how I teach the Islam and politics class, but maybe even new classes. So the new project that I'm working on now, and I've called this the next book, but I would prefer to think of it as a kind of broader paradigm shift in how I think about Islam and politics. that will work its way into, how I do research, yes, how I do teaching, how I do public scholarship. And so I've been kind of thinking about this and playing with the idea of what I call unthinking Islamism. Um, and this kind of gets back to the what I take to be the enormous analytical anemia associated with concepts like political Islam and Islamism that we've touched on. And it's not just what those terms imply, but the way that we have thought about them, the way that we have theorized them, more specifically, the historical and intellectual genealogies that we have built around them. And what I mean by that is that there's a tendency to, when we think of political Islam or Islamism, to kind of think in terms of a very specific and narrow milieu of movements and groups. I think, most clearly expressed through the Muslim Brotherhood Ikhwanist tradition, if I can put it that way. But to kind of read, define, and locate Islamism primarily, if not exclusively, in that line of thought and that particular modality of activism, that tells a certain story about how the ideologues associated with certain contemporary political parties and social movements in the Middle East and elsewhere are themselves informed by the ideas of, a certain kind of pantheon of 20th century Islamist thinkers like Sayyid Qutb, Hassan al-Banna, Abu Ala Maududi in South Asia, who themselves are then kind of the inheritors of a tradition of activism and thought that includes figures like Rashid Ridda, Muhammad Abdul, Jamaluddin al-Afghani, and then you sort of, you have this kind of story that goes back down to eventually like Ibn Taymiyyah, and it's sort of told as this linear genealogy. And so what I'm trying to do with this new work is to say, you know what, in fixing these very narrow parameters around something we call Islamism, we have to some extent de-worlded Islamism, or we've de-worlded Muslim and Islamically based expressions of political impulse and proposals for alternative ways of organizing social, political, and economic life, and redefine them in terms of this sort of very narrow agenda. So what I'm trying to do is to say, let's decenter this idea of political Islam or Islamism. And when we want to talk about a thing in the world, let's talk more about something called the global Islamic movement. And there's a historical move involved here in that I'm trying to kind of rewind the empirical focus of my work back to the period from the 1970s to the 1990s, where you had a wide range of activist figures in Africa, in Algeria, in Iran, in Southeast Asia, who understood themselves to be engaging in political activism that had an Islamic reference point, and whose goals and alternative political imaginaries were maybe articulated and framed in religious terms, but who were not intellectually limited or confined to some narrow conception of Islamic normativity. And what I mean by this is that when you look closely at the political biographies of figures that were maybe moving in the international networks that were to some degree associated with the Muslim Brotherhood and its branches around the world, a lot of these same figures were simultaneously enmeshed in all sorts of other spaces of activism and spaces of ideas and political idea generation that were, largely divorced from anything that we would recognize as political Islam. So, it's possible, if you were to go to, the coast of Kenya in the 1970s, you would find political activists, Muslim political activists, who were aware of the Muslim Brotherhood as a form of modern Islamically informed political ideology, um, but who were also had one eye on and fascinated by what was going on in Iran, which they kind of connected to broader third worldist debates. These people were reading the Sayyid Qutb, yes, but they were also reading Frantz Fanon. They were also engaged with Maoist ideas in terms of the modalities and organization of political activism. And so what I'm trying to do is to sort of reconnect what we call political Islam to a much broader space of and a broader vista of counter hegemonic political activism that has been present in the world, but that has been largely erased from the story of political Islam because it has come to be retroactively defined in terms of this much more narrow kind of Ikhwanist kind of vision, which was present. It was present, it was there, but it's just not the whole story. And so I do this empirically through a set of political biographies. I'm also particularly interested in the internationalist dimensions of Black American Muslim activism during this same period. Obviously Malcolm X is a pivotal figure here as someone who is played an iconic role in the American civil rights struggle. From an avowedly Muslim position and positionality, politically speaking, but who always understood his activism and his work to be strongly connected to broader global struggles for racial justice and national liberation amongst fellow Muslim people, as well as non-Muslim struggles. And so I think by kind of building out into the post-Malcolm period, that ongoing story of Black American Muslim internationalism, you actually begin to have access to an infrastructure that actually helps us to make sense of some of the things that we see going on today in the cross-fertilization of activist space around the world. So these are some of the ideas that I'm playing with in this new project as it develops.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. This was really informative, and I definitely need to go back and listen to some of this as I shared with my other guests because I'm learning a lot. I actually, of course, anticipated that this would be educational, but I'm learning a lot not just about your work, but also about how you do things and how you operate. You and the other colleagues that I've spoken with. So this has been for me a very educational experience, and thank you for joining us again.
Does Bassam, does one of us get to interview you for this podcast at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to get, as you probably know, I'm trying to get people to join me in interviewing others, but everybody's so busy, and sometimes coordinating two people interviewing is not easy. But I am happy to give my share anytime, and it'll be nice if you can do it because I know that you've sort of seen me through from the beginning
Yes.
of my
No.
entry.
Let's do this same thing, but bilaks, and
طيب.
I don't have the same equipment that you have, but
Will your
studio, but
will your family mind if I go there to your desk and you come here?
no, it'll be great.
Okay, we'll do that. And I just want to say that for the sake of clarity, that behind me is the book, which is your book, and you commented before we started the live show that my head is hiding it, and I just wanted people to see it. If I can just turn like this, that's the
Yeah, I
book.
thought, oh, like, because you said you wanted to feature it, and then like, oh, great, his head is in front of it. Thanks, Bassam.
Uh, yeah, well, I'm also waiting until you are done with, and I am done with a lot of the core work that we are doing, so that we can do our other show, which will not be suitable for an academic audience.
No, that's right.
A satirical. Well, actually, maybe it will be basically a satirical show. There isn't such a thing. There isn't a satirical show on an academic unit at a university. There's one on everything almost, but not on this. And I think it's because the blowback would be so severe.
I was going to say the levels of risk involved in that is
And the analysis. Okay. Thank you again. I'll ask you this last question so that we could
okay.
release you. And that is about your activities outside George Mason or inside George Mason that are not about specifically research material or even courses and classroom material. If you can tell us about what you have been doing and what you plan to do in terms of public engagement, as we know and as we've shared, based on your bio, you've been quite active, not only in the public realm in terms of speaking, but also in the political realm, where you advised Secretary of State, and you've had a couple of positions where you were able to see the workings of real politics, if you will. Can you tell us about that and about what you might have in store going forward?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, when I had the opportunity to work at the State Department for the first time as a member of Hillary Clinton's policy planning staff, this was, my first day at the State Department was the day that the Egyptian revolution started. And I had been brought in to, it takes months and months to get yourself into government because of all the background checks and stuff they have to do. So they'd asked me to come in like almost a year before. So no one had any idea at that point that the uprisings were going to be happening. And what they wanted me to do was to just come in and help them think hypothetically about the question of what it might mean to change US policy towards mainstream Islamist parties like the Muslim Brotherhood, in the context of a new US commitment to political reform and democracy in the Middle East. Again, this was like early 2010 that they were asking me to do this. So I thought I was going to go in there and, write some interesting think papers, totally hypothetical stuff. Then I arrived and, a week after starting, they literally plunked me down in front of Hillary Clinton and said, okay, tell her what to do about the Muslim Brotherhood. And I was like, I don't know. I just write books about them. I have no idea what I should tell you to do. So that was really fascinating, is to suddenly be on the hook for coming up with a new policy approach to Islamist groups that might actually be followed and implemented by the US government rather than just writing this kind of analysis. So that was an exhilarating year to spend. The second time I went
Read,
back in, sorry.
read chapter 2 of my second book. I mean, that could have been your answer or something like that.
Yes, right, yes. Well, Madam Secretary, as I say on page 234, the second time I went in was around ISIS. And I did so in part because I saw the US government starting to do some kind of weird stuff, shall we say, around religion and where religion fit into, addressing the whole ISIS challenge. But the real reason I wanted to go in was because the State Department had just created at that point, John Kerry at that point had created a new office that was dedicated to kind of installing the function of religious engagement into American diplomacy, to sort of help American diplomats to understand the relevance and importance of religion as a force around the world, and to become more adept and more comfortable at engaging with religious actors as a routine component of American diplomacy. So I helped to sort of create the office and the infrastructure for doing that. And that's relevant because I continue to be engaged in that line of work now. One of the things I did at that point was to create a transatlantic network comprising foreign ministry officials from 15 countries in Europe, North America, the European Union, and the United Nations, all of them being foreign ministry officials who focus on religion for their country, and to sort of create this space where diplomats who deal with religion would have a mechanism for coordinating communication, policy, kind of feeling their way together through this complicated, sensitive, and tricky issue. That network that we created back in 2015 still exists. When it was first set up, I was the American government representative to that network. they subsequently set up an advisory council composed of academics and practitioners and experts who deal with religion. And I now co-chair that advisory council. So I kind of still have a hand in that work, which involves a lot of engagement and advising of governments around some of these questions. And I also right now have an affiliation part-time with the United States Institute of Peace, where I'm part of a team there at the Institute that focuses on the role of religion in conflict and peace building settings. So those are sort of the two main channels through which I continue to be kind of engaged in more public policy oriented work alongside the more traditionally academic research and teaching that I do. Bassam, I'm not hearing you.
Sorry, I keep saying this, and it's getting old. But the past year, the two major global crises have been COVID and the mute button. So it's unbelievable. So I have been listening, with attention to all of what you've been sharing, and I have so many questions, which I've had with Maria, with Hussein, with Sashidina. But I have to, at some point, we have to stop the interview because, I promised you, or I share, like, it's about half an hour, and we're like at 45 minutes now. Is there anything else? I mean, besides the fact that we might have other conversations, is there anything else that you would like to close with? Is there something that you would like to share before we let you go? Is there anything about this current moment politically and in terms of the public health crisis that you'd like to share and leave us with? Just a minute or two if you want to say anything or share anything.
I mean, as someone who has been following with some trepidation the kind of reconfiguration of the political landscape in the Middle East, even though I'm not really working directly on kind of basic aspects of US foreign policy in the Middle East right now, I can't think of another time when the United States has been so what's the right word, out of sorts in terms of figuring out how to think about and engage with this region. It's not to say that there haven't been enormous challenges and crises that the US has had to deal with, but they've always occurred within a fairly stable and predictable order in terms of how the US engages with and fits into the Middle East. And I think over the last 10 years, progressively, each component of that framework that has defined, the US role in the Middle East has come undone. And so I'm just very conscious that we're going through a time right now of enormous uncertainty and unpredictability. And, again, even though I'm not kind of focused on this in my own work, it's always sort of lurking and kind of haunting everything that I think about. And so even though when we talk about, changes in the global order, they tend to be stories about, the rise of China or the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, et cetera. That's interesting and fine. But I actually think that the Middle East is one of the, if not the most fascinating region in the world to serve as a site for exploring what the actual implications of these shifts in global order will look like in terms of how they affect people's lives, how they reconfigure politics within regions, as we see going on right now with the way that Russia, India, and China have these new sorts of relationships with countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And so I think it's a fascinating time to kind of watch this reconfiguration happen. And the Middle East is a fascinating region in which to watch it play out.
Absolutely. Uh, that was good. Yeah, that's actually something to watch, and on many counts. And I really hope that we get a chance to continue the conversation with all of our colleagues. You haven't talked about some things that I just remembered, but I'm not gonna ask you because we've already outstayed our welcome. And hopefully I'll see you soon on campus. I understand that we're moving, like both Middle East and Islamic Studies as well, and the Center for Global Islamic Studies and our Shar School, where you and I are
Yes.
both connected to both units. Both are moving
Yep.
to new places. So I hope to see you there, and thank you for being generous with your time and for sharing with us these great insights. In the next few minutes, I'm actually going to transfer or move to a conversation with Professor Sumaya Hamdani, and
Okay.
I will be seeing you soon. Shukran. Thank you.
Afwan. Thanks, Bassam. It's been fun.
I am hoping that people will be watching this and then will be telling their children, their kids, their like college kids, you have to get an MA and take a course with this man. Yeah.
Absolutely. They should study with you
Yeah.
for sure.
With you.
No, with you.
What? What? There's, I
Huh?
didn't say anything today. I just ask questions. I have like a list of questions. Okay. Salam.
Salam.
Shukran. Bye.
Afwan.